What's up guys, TFC here, welcome back to my series. So yeah, it's been quite a while since the last video, meant to do one a lot sooner but got tied up. And also, there wasn't really a lot I could have done tutorial wise until I'd done some work on the Heightmap. Now, last time obviously went over stuff like berms, track paths, jumps and that kind of thing. Using those methods, I've spent some time working on the Heightmap and I've pretty much nailed the overall layout, jumps, corners, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go into L3DT and stick textured on, and we'll just take a quick look at all of that. Last time we'd done some work around here, the downhill, the corners at the bottom. Turns out they work really nice in game. This jump right here works perfectly. I've finished this section here. I've shaped this tabletop right here, this corner at the bottom, down into the uphill. We've got a massive floaty table up the top here. Split lanes right here. We've got some big rollers on the inside of the corners, which should make for some interesting line choices. Out the corner here, we've got a single into a downhill table, small double going back up. We've got a kind of hip jump right here, down into this long floaty double right here, and into this massive floaty hill jump right here. Big sweeping corner, and then back down. We've got a wall jump all the way along to the finish jump and back onto the start straight. At the bottom here, I've actually left this straight right here. Now, on some versions of the track, there's some stuff right here like rollers, a couple of big rollers for the MX Nations, for example. And we've got this S-bend right here, these two big bold berms, and then up the hill to the very top, back down, and that's one. That's a complete look at the track and all the work that I've done on it to get it to this point. Now, like I said before, I'm not really focusing on a specific year because I think for Majora there's some really good stuff, there's some really bad stuff in some years. For example, after this hip kind of tabletop right here, some years this is just straight, flat and boring, and I much prefer these massive floaters. They're a lot more fun to hit, they make a track a lot more interesting. Also up here, some years you'd come up around this corner and then you drop straight back down into the track. Now, I kind of like this up and out kind of feel, a little bit more elevation to it, and it just provides for a bit more of an exciting track. So, no specific year, but it floats from about 2014 onwards. And I have no idea what's going to happen for because it's part of the MXGP this year of Italy. I have no idea what is going to happen, what the layout's going to be. So this is going to be kind of a one-off. Hopefully it's going to be pretty similar. Anyway, so that's that. So what I'm going to do is just hop into game and we'll have a quick lap on that so you guys can take a look to see where we're at. Alright, so we'll start from here. So a lot of what you'll see at the start is kind of what we did last time anyway. So we've got the start straight. I've since added this kind of bermed outer edge. Again, this straight's got nothing going on. We've got a nice bold corner right here leading up into another real nice bold corner. This uphill is pretty much what we did last time. I've added a berm at the top into the downhill. Now these corners work really nicely. You can really get the bike leaned over, you can get some slide going on. This one can be a bit tricky. And then we've got into this real nice table right here. Around that corner, into the uphill. Now that's different on some years as well. Over this big floaty table, into the split lane section. I'm going to go outside, outside. The inside works really nicely as well. And back out. Over the single. Got a downhill table that can be a bit tricky. Might need some rounding off. Up into the hip. And then out over these floaty jumps right here, which are a lot of fun to hit. Anyway, what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to, now we've had a quick recap, is we're going to look at roughness, braking bumps and acceleration bumps and some of those finer details. So let's go back to the desktop. Let's look at adding some braking and acceleration bumps to start with. And to do that, let's take a look at YouTube. I'm going to stick on some footage of the MXGP of Italy 2014 just because it's one of the first ones I came across where we have actual, like a full race replay, because it really doesn't matter really too much what year we're looking at. And let's spot some areas which have some real noticeable braking bumps and acceleration bumps. So, bottom of this hill right there, there's quite a lot of braking bumps. A few leading up to there as well, although that's going to be different on ours. So let's add some of these that we've just seen. Alright, so we're going to go to our height field editor. We will stick textured on. Again, makes it run really nice. Makes it run really smooth. And we're looking at this downhill right here towards the corner where people are most likely going to be slamming the anchors on, which is what, about here, probably down all the way down to about here. So basically the transition between the downhill and the corner. So there's a couple of ways you can do these. My favorite really is using the raise brush to actually raise the terrain. You can also use the bulldozer and you can actually give it a vertical offset and you can visibly draw across the track and then smooth. Personally, I find the raise brush gives me exactly what I want. And what you tend to find is you can do braking and acceleration bumps really lightly, so they're hardly noticeable at first. And as you ride, they get more and more kind of vicious, which is really cool. So I'm going to carry on doing it this way for the tutorial. If you guys want to experiment with other ways, that's what this is all about. So get on with it. Let me know how you get on. Alright, so what I do is I get the raise brush, and I'm going to use a strength of about, well, I'm going to start with 1%. We might up that a little bit in a minute. We'll see how we get on. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the camera up with the track. So when I go forward and backwards using W and S, I stay in line with the track, and when I go left and right to strafe it with A and D, as you can see, my brush kind of crosses the track horizontally, and I'm going to pull back to about where we want them to start, probably about here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to click and draw while I pan from left to right, like this. I'm going to have a relatively small brush as well, like this. Okay, and as you can see, what that's done is it's created a bump. Alright, so you can see that bump quite clearly on here. When you get into game, that will be very difficult really to spot. If you view polygon, you'll see exactly what it's done, which is pretty good. So we're going to leave it on textured. I'm actually going to lower the clip a little bit just so we've got a little bit more memory to play with. And I'm going to do a few more of these going down. Maybe a couple of passes on this one. Up the brush size, we want a little bit of variation, so I'm going to up it a couple of sizes. Do this one right here. Okay, so this is one way of doing it. Another method that I like to do is I'll take roughly the same position, but what I'll do is I will just freehand draw it. So for example, you get down the bottom here, you might find that there's people in the outside lane might rail the bottom a little bit harder, people on the inside might brake a little bit later. So you might want the braking bumps to carry on to the inside a little bit more. Now I can see from the satellite image that there is an inside rut right here in the image that we've got. I'm not necessarily going to add that in because a lot of the GoPro footage I watched, there is no inside line. So I'm just going to put some acceleration bumps a little bit further up to the inside. So one way of doing it is freehand as well. So click and then draw where you want that bump to be. And as you see, it's a lot less, well, it's kind of a lot less accurate in a way because it's down to how fast you move your hand and how consistent that bump will be drawn. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because in real life you get real kind of variation to these bumps. So I'm going to do the same again, just a bit of freehand, slowed down towards the inside just so it's a little bit stronger. And again, we don't want these to become too big, so I'm going to reduce the brush size a little bit. And then I'm going to kind of tighten up the grouping as well so they're a little bit closer together. Okay, and then as they go in, they get lower and lower. So as you can see on here, that looks quite violent. In game, it will be a lot less noticeable. And there's no real need to smooth this stuff. Once you've got braking bumps down like that, you'll either go in game and test them and find out they're way too violent or they're not enough, but they will never be game breaking. So don't worry too much about smoothing over. All you're going to do if you smooth is you're going to be destroying. So even on one end cycle, you're literally going to be flattening that area very quickly. So I wouldn't smooth too much. If you find like this in the middle here might be a little bit harsh, just give it a couple of touches. But other than that, you really don't want to be smoothing at all. I'm just going to tighten up the end here as well. So I'll stick the end cycles on about 4 and just try and cover some of that off track to get rid of those bumps. So acceleration bumps, obviously you get from sliding out of a corner and that rear end trying to grab traction. You can add some of these as well. So again, it's the same kind of principle. I tend to go slightly bigger on the brush size and very really kind of light strokes. So maybe even a little bit bigger at the very end, so it's more of a wave. And you're going to have this kind of across, it's a bit too much, kind of across the track at this point. So again, you can stick this on polygon and see what that's done. Now, that won't feel too mad, but it will feel quite cool to ride over once it starts eroding. When you start getting that terrain deformation coming through and it starts kind of taking chunks out of the ground, you'll really start to feel those bumps and lines. So another place we spotted these was up the top here, and that's going to be across the track generally speaking, coming up to this section. So I'm going to grab the raise brush again, I'm going to make it quite small, and I'm going to work my way across the track. With a few passes. And that is really hard to see what's going on up there. So we'll stick it in polygon, and you'll see that we have started making some bumps, although they are not coming through as strongly as they did at the bottom. Not really sure why. So just go over those, kind of give them some depth. And again, you've probably got a few more going up the top of this single, roller, because people are going to be slamming the brakes on a little bit harder. So you really don't want too much, and that might actually be too much. But you really don't want anything up here, because this is supposed to be the faster line. Now leading into this is where you might want to do a little bit of smoothing. So I'd probably go for something like that, and then I might get the smooth, maybe on one end cycle. We'll make it relatively large, and just smooth the entrance onto these a little bit, so it's not such an instant like hitting a whoop section. Alright, so that's that section just there, which looks pretty decent. Probably not going to have much in the way of acceleration bumps coming out of this corner, because it's flowy and fast. And same again coming off this this single roller right here. You're going to be into this roller straight away. It's a relatively fast section, so probably not much to adjust right there. So let's go and have a look again at the track itself. Okay, so there's quite a lot going into this bottom corner right here. I also notice that this corner is very off camber in this YouTube video, but this is an older track than the section I'm making is from at least the 2016 track right here, where it did have a very purposeful downhill straight with a tabletop, and it was very flattened off into the corner, so not too inconsistent there, I hope. So we're going to do the same again. We're going to get the raised brush. Now this is quite a fast one, so I'm going to go a little bit larger to start with. Just going to go across. And maybe make it a little bit smaller just towards. And again, I'm just going to carry a few more onto the inside. Alright, and again, go on polygon mode just to check what you've done. That looks pretty cool. We'll see how that feels in game. Alright, so right here you've probably really not got a lot, especially down here and into this corner. It's all very fast, it's all very flowy. One area I do foresee there being quite a lot of braking bumps would be down this hill towards this single. So let's have a look at the video again and see what we've got down the bottom there. Yeah, so these are the jumps that I've gone for because they're fantastic. They're very cool. And not going to see a lot of that at the bottom there. So that's back in, and there's a few, but there's not loads. So we'll put some down. That last one was a bit much, and let's just have a go with that and see how that feels. Alright, so that's the basics of acceleration and braking bumps. Into corners, a little bit more, a little bit tighter, a little bit bigger. Out of corners, kind of wavy. You want to space them far enough apart that you get this kind of wave effect right here, which will feel great to ride. So one other thing I'm going to cover is roughness. Now, general track roughness, obviously tracks in real life, they're not made out of this smoothed polygon kind of material. Anyone who's ridden a track in real life knows just how rough it can be, completely randomly as well, especially a track that's been turned regularly and that's not hard pack, or not too hard pack. So to do that in L3DT, you want to use this bottom option right here, which is called Perlin noise. Now what this does is, if you're familiar with noise in any other paint programs, it's basically random. It's basically just kind of like random distortion. And in the case of noise in L3DT, you can change things like feature scale, which is the noise itself. So for example, let me just draw a little bit for you so you can see what it does. Okay, so as you can see there, that is really churning up the floor, which is very cool, but way too extreme for what we want. If I change that feature scale down to, say, it's at 0.5 at the moment, if I make it 0.25, say, and half it, you can see that there are the features for 0.25. If I make it 0.75, you can see the difference. So the features right here are a lot bigger, the features right here are a lot smaller. That's the actual noise itself. So I'm going to undo both of those. For this, we probably want closer to the 0.25. We probably want actually closer to the 0.5 that we were on originally. N octaves is an interesting one. If I set that to 1, okay, that makes things very slopey. If I set it to 10, it makes things a lot more jagged. So we'll call the N octaves kind of like the detail. For that, I'm going to leave it on about 3. I want the strength way down at about 10%. And persistence, if I set that to 0.2, and just draw like right there, and then I'll set that to 0.8. You can kind of get an idea of what that's doing. So to find the kind of the right noise for your track, it's going to take some playing around with. So I tend to find 0.5 on persistence, 0.5 feature scale, 3 octaves, about 10% strength. Radius is obviously the size of your tool. And to make some roughness along here, I'm just going to click and drag, and I'm going to move in kind of steps all the way down there. Now, the good thing about roughness is if you've got too much, you can smooth it off. So if I go to polygon, you can see exactly what it's done. It's made a very cool kind of surface, which is going to be interesting to ride. You might not notice a lot of it, but the fact is that noticing this kind of thing in MX bikes is not always something that you have to, you don't always have to notice every little track feature. As long as you get the overall feeling, a good feeling when you ride the track, that's the most important thing. So they're just a couple of tricks that I use to, like I say, to do braking bumps, acceleration bumps, and on-track roughness. Alright, so what I'm going to do is just export this. I'm speeding this up for the sake of time and the fact that no one wants to sit and watch map.bat run. I understand some of you watching this might not know how to do all of this, so if you don't, please refer to my earlier tutorials. Go back and start on number 1, and you'll learn everything you need to know. Alright, so let's check out some of these sections. Okay, so the first one's just after this tabletop. There's the bumps. There's the wavy acceleration bumps coming out, which feel great. Next is just after this big table here, leading up into the single, which weren't very noticeable, but I could feel them on the controller. Okay, got some big ones leading up into this corner. You're on the brakes hard. Into the hip Not a lot going on down this area. Okay, so coming down the hill here, we're going to have some very light braking bumps, just there, and then we're into the roughness. Now the great thing about the roughness, even though you might not have been able to really see it, is that it gave a feeling, and it gave a you know, kind of like a visual to the rear fender bouncing around, the rear end bouncing about, which is very cool, because anyone who's been to a real track will know that it isn't just smooth and groomed absolutely everywhere. Even a track that's been turned, you get a lot of lumps, a lot of bumps, constant vibration, and that is really kind of like the feeling that you want to go for on your track. So yeah, that's about it really. I just wanted to kind of cover the basics of how I do these track details in L3DT with the tools that we have available. Like I say, these braking and acceleration bumps and the roughness to some extent will just get better over time the more it's played with the deformation. So hopefully you can put that to good use. Coming up next time, we'll be looking at texturing. So although we've already done the basic textures and I feel like I've given you guys enough to get started with, we're going to be taking a look at some tricks and techniques that I use to make stuff look even more realistic. And we're going to be taking a look at the masks because they were very rough. And we're going to line those masks up with the Heightmap and make it perfect using the texture map brush in L3DT to kind of lay out some boundaries. So that's all coming soon. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like. If you want to keep up to date with the series, please subscribe. And that's about it. I'll catch you later.